of people have heard about the Mediterranean diet, the Okinawan diet, all sorts of diets, right? Now, does the U.S. have a traditional diet? Does the United States of America, do we have a traditional diet for the United States of America that has been supplanted by the modern diet of commerce, as Weston Price would say? And you will find, yes, indeed, we did at one time, and in some places we still do, and it's probably time for us to reclaim this diet. There's no need to get super exotic with our diets, but there is a need to look at what is the traditional diet of the United States of America, and how can we re-implement such a diet that it would promote health. So is U.S. diet policy making the military too fat? Obviously, yes. The U.S. military has a crisis on its hands as obesity rates continue to rise, both among existing troops and potential recruits who are too fat to serve. This year, for the first time since 2005, the Army fell short of its recruitment goal, according to the recent report. Unhealthy and unprepared by the Council for a Strong America, a group of retired generals and admirals, obesity was largely to blame. Some 71% of young people between the ages of 17 and 24 fail to qualify for military service, says the report. These alarming numbers raise the disturbing question of whether the U.S. will be able to continue the luxury of maintaining an all-volunteer army in the future. Another recent study, this one by the Rand Corporation, found that some 2/3 of the nation's active military personnel are overweight or obese. This is active military personnel. Topping the scale is the Army, with 69.4% of its personnel overweight or obese. But even the trimmest military branch, the Marine Corps, isn't much better at 60.9%. That's the Marine Corps at 60.9%. That's over half of the service is obese. These numbers may be misleading, since obesity is defined by body mass index, which does not distinguish between whether extra pounds... Okay, so that could be why, because they're not saying whether it's fat or muscle. Hopefully it's muscle. I don't know if it is. It seems, in fact, that the U.S. military diet actually worsens health, according to an Army publication 6 years ago. Chanel S. Weaver of the U.S. Army Public Health Command wrote, "Even those soldiers who are actually fit enough to deploy can face challenges in maintaining a healthy weight while serving in the deployed environment." Wow, that's kind of ridiculous. Okay, in the article, Dr. Teresa Jackson, a public health scientist at the U.S. Army Public Health Command, states, literature suggests that fitness decreases and fat mass increases during deployments. This is an astonishing fact. Fitness declines in the military despite mandated regular exercise. This paradox could be explained by the growing understanding that exercise plays a relatively minor role in weight loss. You cannot exercise your way out of a bad diet, is the new common catchphrase among experts. Instead, the principal factor driving obesity, as the data increasingly shows, is poor nutrition. A look at the Army's nutrition guidelines shows that they emphasize low-fat, high-carbohydrate foods. The Army recommends eating high-protein, low-fat items such as fish, beans, whole wheat pasta, egg whites, skim milk, or 1% milk. This might be their policy, but I guarantee you this is not what people are eating. While avoiding items such as fried items, high-fat meats, egg yolks, and whole milk. This guideline comes from the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans. However, you will probably notice the Army advises egg whites and even egg beaters. That's not a fake food. Over whole eggs. Okay. So the problem isn't what they're encouraging. The problem is what people are eating. Ironically, this reliance on the U.S. guidelines, they're not pointing out what these people are actually eating. 50 to 60% of their calories is carbohydrates, principally grains. So, yeah, this is not what they're actually eating, though. They're eating donuts and stuff like that on base. I will guarantee you that. I know that for a fact. So let's move on. So I wanted to start with some of the dietary suggestions of U.S. health reformers. So let's see here. This is Sylvester Graham was born in Suffield, Connecticut, July 5th, 1794, from a long line of physicians. He was the 17th child of 72-year-old blah, blah, blah. Okay, Amherst College. He invented the graham cracker made with unsifted whole wheat flour. He also invented high-fiber graham bread. Okay, Sylvester Graham advocated a Spartan lifestyle because he feared the weakening of traditional institutions and the ensuing disorder within himself, as well as the, cut off part of the, let me see if I can shrink that. No, I can't. Okay, Sylvester Graham also influenced Horace Greeley and John Harvey Kellogg. Okay. Some dismissed Graham. Ralph Waldo Emerson called the poet of bran and pumpkins. So who was Horace Fletcher? Now they call him a food faddist, the great masticator. Okay. So Fletcher was born August 10th, 1849 at Haverhill Street in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He left home at 16 and throughout his career, blah, 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 Fletcher and his followers recited and followed his instructions religiously, even claiming that liquids, too, had to be chewed in order to be properly mixed with saliva. Fletcher argued that his mastication method will increase the amount of strength a person could have while actually decreasing the amount of food that he consumed. Fletcher promised that Fletcherizing, as it had become known, would turn a pitiable glutton into an intelligent Epicurean. Fletcher also advised against eating before being hungry, or not eating before being hungry. Don't eat before you're good and hungry, or while angry or sad. Fletcher would claim that knowing exactly what was in the food one consumed was important. He stated that different foods have different waste materials, so knowing what type of waste one was going to have in one's body was valuable knowledge. Okay, he promoted his theories for decades on lecture circuits and became a millionaire. Blah, blah, blah. Upton Sinclair, Henry James, and J.D. Rockefeller were among those who gave his ideas a try. Henry James and Mark Twain were visitors to his palazzo in Venice. He lived in the palazzo with his wife, Grace Fletcher, an amateur painter who studied in Paris. Okay. Fletcher inspired, let's see. Fletcher and his supporters advocated a low-protein diet as a means to health and well-being. What that means is low-meat diet. Fletcher had a special interest in human excreta, meaning feces. He believed that the only true indication of one's nutrition was evidenced by excreta. Now, this might sound crazy, but you have to remember the time period. Okay. Fletcher advocated teaching children to examine their excreta. If one was in good health and maintained proper nutrition, then their excreta, or digestive ash as Fletcher called it, should be entirely inoffensive. By inoffensive, Fletcher meant that there was no stench and no evidence of bacterial decomposition. Fletcher was an avid spokesman for Belgian relief and a member of the Commission Relief in Belgium in World War I. Fletcher, in 1969, died of bronchitis in Copenhagen on January 13, 1969. His message to humanity to have an excellent overall health was to have a holistic approach. The approach has only 3 steps. Eat when you have a good appetite. Chew the food like pulp and drink that pulp. Do not swallow food. So chew your food until it becomes a liquid, until it becomes liquefied, and then swallow that. Do not swallow huge chunks of food. Drink all the liquids and liquid food sip by sip. Do not drink in gulps. Okay, so that's his suggestion. So this is perhaps the simplest diet, and of course you combine this with some great mastication, So, in her 1903 book entitled Education, Ellen G. White wrote, "Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables in proper combination contain all of the elements of nutrition, and when properly prepared, they constitute the diet that best promotes both physical and mental health, or physical and mental strength." So, White wrote, "Grains, nuts, vegetables in proper combination contain all the elements of nutrition, and when properly prepared, they constitute the diet that best promotes both physical and mental strength." So keep that in mind, and this is from Ellen G. White, the prophetess of Seventh-day Adventism. So one of White's contemporaries was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. In fact, Ellen White is one of the reasons he became a doctor, actually funding his ability to go to medical school. So he wrote a book, Biologic Living. Okay. He promoted modern breakfast cereals. Okay. He was a vegetarian and did not serve meat at the sanitarium, believing that it lessened physical strength and harbored bacteria. Based on these beliefs, he experimented with creating his own bland health food products and feeding them to sanitarium patients. Kellogg's modern fame is due to, in large part, to his involvement in the creation and popularization of modern breakfast cereals. It's important to note that his brother changed the formulas to include sugar. He did not. From 1877 onwards, Kellogg ran various food companies, selling to former patients and the general public the food served at the health resort. The mail-order-based The Battle Creek Food Company was the venture responsible for the pamphlet in our collection. Okay. Eventually, So, in the mid-1890s, purportedly after discussing the issue of supplying adequate protein to the world's growing population with Dr. Charles W. Danby, Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. According to researchers, it took Kellogg a lot of experimentation to get a product that held together and wasn't acrid or sour. Eventually, he was successful using combinations of nut and wheat products. The sanitarium product to be marketed as a meat alternative was Nuttose, the perfect substitute for flesh food, which first became available in 1896. He created one of the first meat substitutes. The next product was Protose, produced from both grains and nuts, which was patented, trademarked, and made available in 1899. As evidenced in our pamphlet, these meat alternatives were still on sale 30 years later, and Kellogg continued to strongly advocate their benefits. For Nuttose, a rich, meaty flavor was touted. Protose had the lofty claim that it looks like meat, tastes like meat, smells like meat, has the composition of meat, and even the fiber of meat. John Harvey Kellogg remained actively interested in developing alternative meat products until late in his life, and was involved in various capacities with the Battle Creek Sanitarium until his death. The Great Depression, blah blah blah. Okay. Some of Paul Bragg's dietary suggestions. Now, I want people to go back, look at some of the stuff that I have on Paul Bragg. I've made a whole video series on Paul Bragg. On Jack LaLanne. I made one video about Paul Bragg. Be sure your diet includes plenty of foods rich in B vitamins, raw wheat germ, brewer's yeast, blackstrap, unsulfured molasses, brown rice, lentils, barley, soybeans, dried peas and beans, peanuts, cornmeal, buckwheat groats, mushrooms, broccoli, turnip, and mustard greens, spinach, peas, cabbage, grapefruit, and oranges. Never, under any circumstances, use mineral oil as a laxative. Mineral oil robs the body of the fat-soluble vitamins. Okay. It's a famous pep drink made from apple cider. That's one of the things that Bragg is very famous for, is the pep drink made from 1 to 2 teaspoons of apple cider, and you put it in 8 ounces of water. Okay. A lot of people like bashing the United States Department of Agriculture and claim that the United States Department of Agriculture is the reason that people are fat now. What you will notice, if you have even a minute ability of sense, is that people do not follow the USDA recommendations. The USDA diet is fine if people actually followed what the hell the USDA is saying. So here's the earliest guides. The USDA's first nutrition guidelines were published in 1894 by Dr. Wilbur Olin Atwater as a farmer's bulletin. In Atwater's 1904 publication titled Principles of Nutrition and Nutritive Value of Food, he advocated variety, proportionately in moderation, measuring calories, and an efficient, affordable diet that focused on nutrient-rich foods and less fat, sugar, and starch. So less fat, sugar, and starch. Well, wow, that doesn't sound too crazy, does it? This information preceded the discovery of individual vitamins beginning in 1910, a new guide in 1916, Food for Young Children by nutritionist Carolyn Hunt, categorized foods into milk and meat, cereals, vegetables and fruits, fats and fatty foods, and sugars and sugary foods. How to Select Food in 1917 promoted these 5 food groups. I think that this is actually the best version of the USDA recommendations, ironically. This is one of the first ones. It's called the Basic 7. It was produced in 1943 during World War II. And it advocated green and yellow vegetables, some raw, some cooked, frozen, or canned. Oranges, tomatoes, grapefruit, or raw cabbage, or salads, that's Group 2. Group 3, potatoes and other vegetables and fruits, raw, dried, cooked, frozen, or canned. 4, milk and milk products, fluid, evaporated, dried milk, or cheese. 5, meat, poultry, fish or eggs, or dried beans, peas, nuts, and peanut butter. 6, bread, flour, and cereals, natural, whole grain, or enriched or restored. Butter and fortified margarine with added vitamin A. The basic 4 food groups. This is the milk, meat, fruit, and vegetables, and bread and cereals. Other foods were said to round out meals and satisfy appetites. These included additional servings from the basic 4, or foods such as butter, margarine, salad dressing, and cooking oil, sauces, jellies, and syrups. The Basic 4 guide was omnipresent in nutrition education in the United States. Notable example is the 1972 series Mulligan's Stew, providing nutrition education for school children in reruns until 1981. I actually saw some of them back when I was a kid. What you have to understand, when children and adults were following this nutritional advice, people were healthy. The food pyramid, I don't see anything terribly wrong with the food pyramid, but the food pyramid, of course, suggests 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. Now, that should be whole grain, but they don't recommend that. That's the problem. Okay? So, that's the large base of the pyramid. 3 to 5 servings of vegetables and then fruits, then milk, yogurt, and cheese, followed by meat, poultry, fish, dry beans, eggs, and nuts. I think beans, which beans are technically included in the grains also because they're a starch, but I think you should eat pretty much equal grains and beans. Okay? My pyramid, this was a newer one in 2005. This added up to the left. The share of the pyramid allotted to grains now only narrowly edged out by vegetables. So the thing is, you want more vegetables in your life, basically. Okay, keep that in mind. And milk, and milk, which were equal proportions. Fruits were next in size, so you want less fruits than vegetables, as I've been saying, followed by a narrower wedge for protein and a smaller sliver for oils. Now, I don't agree with that narrower wedge for protein, but I do agree that your protein should be coming primarily from legumes, and that should be included with the starches, okay? My plate you'll notice you have grains, vegetables, protein, fruits, and dairy. So My Plate is the current nutrition guide published by the United States Department of Agriculture, consisting of a diagram of a plate and glass divided into 5 food groups. Replaced the USDA's My Pyramid diagram on June 2nd, 2011, ending 19 years of food pyramid iconography. Now, remember, this is My Plate. Now, what does that remind you of? Does that remind you of the Basic 7? Interesting, no? They've had to go back. So, the Center for Nutrition Policies and Promotion in the USDA and the United States Department of Health and Human Services jointly released a longer textual document called Dietary Guidelines for Americans, 2015 to 2020, to be updated in 2020. The first edition was published in 1980, and since 1985 has been updated every 5 years. Now, I very recently went over the Harvard Healthy Plate. You'll see vegetables, fruits, healthy protein, whole grains. I went through this in my last series of videos. So the food groups here. At most meals, whole grain foods, including oatmeal, whole wheat bread, and brown rice, 1 piece or 4 ounces. Plant oils, including olive oil, canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, okay? Vegetables in abundance. Vegetables in abundance, okay? Now notice, that's 60 grams of fat per day is what they're promoting, okay? 2 to 3 servings of fruits, each serving 1 piece of fruit or 4 ounces. 1 to 3 servings of nuts or legumes, each serving 2 ounces. 1 to 2 servings of dairy or calcium supplement. Okay, 1 to 2 servings of poultry, fish, or eggs, each serving 4 ounces. Sparing use, I would say no use, of white rice, white bread, potatoes, pasta, and sweets. So remember, Harvard is including potatoes with white foods as well. They should be. The Mayo Clinic Diet. The Mayo Clinic Diet is a diet book first published in 1949 by the Mayo Clinic Committee on Dietetics as the Mayo Clinic Diet Manual. Prior to this, use of that term was generally connected to fad diets with no association to the clinic. The book is now published as the Mayo Clinic Diet. The diet begins with a 2-week period where 5 specific bad habits are replaced by 5 specific good habits. According to the authors, this should result in a 6 to 10 pound weight loss. Okay, the remainder of the program is based in large part on the combination of portion control and exercise/activity. This part of the program is designed to allow the safe loss of 1 to 2 pounds per week, or 50 to 100 pounds, 22 to 45 kilograms, over the course of a year. So the program uses a food pyramid that has vegetables and fruits at its base. It puts carbohydrates, meat and dairy, fats, and sweets into progressively more limited daily allowances. The diet emphasizes setting realistic goals, replacing poor health habits with good ones, and conscious portion control. 5 bad habits: snacks other than fruits and vegetables, over large servings of meat or dairy products, eating restaurant meals that don't follow the diet, watching television while eating. Diets falsely called the Mayo Clinic Diet. Apparently there's been some... The legitimate Mayo Clinic Diet does not promote a high protein or key food approach. There have been diets falsely attributed to Mayo Clinic for decades. Many or most websites claiming to debunk the bogus version of the diet are actually promoting it or a similar fad diet. The Mayo Clinic website appears to no longer acknowledge the existence of the false versions and prefers to promote their own researched diet. Remember, that's a researched diet. Now, this is the Vegetarian Diet Pyramid, is a diet guide representing a traditional healthy vegetarian diet. Variations, North America, Europe, South America, So, Loma Linda University Vegetarian Diet Pyramid. This is very important. This is because the Loma Linda diet is a diet proven to extend life. So what you will notice is whole grains and legumes are down the bottom. Fruits and vegetables, next step. Nuts and seeds, next step. Vegetables and oils, next step. Dairy and eggs, next step. Sweets, last step. So 5 to 12 servings of dairy, 1 to 3 servings of legumes and soy, or legumes or soy, 3 to 4 servings of fruits, 6 to 9 servings of vegetables, 1 to 2 servings of nuts and seeds, 0 to 2 servings of vegetable oils, 0 to 1 serving of eggs, 0 to 2 servings of dairy. So that's the Loma Linda diet. Other lifestyle recommendations: daily exercise, 8 8-ounce glasses of water, sunlight 10 minutes a day to activate vitamin D. Very important right there. Loma Linda University School of Public Health Department of Nutrition developed the vegetarian food pyramid in 1997 for presentation at the 3rd International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition. The 5 major plant-based food groups, whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, form the trapezoid-shaped lower portion of the pyramid. Optional food groups, vegetable oils, dairy, and sweets, form the triangular-shaped top portion. The pyramid of the pyramid. This version of the pyramid includes a table with a recommended number of daily servings per daily calorie intake. This is very important because the Loma Linda diet is proven to extend human life. So as you see, there are numerous healthy ways to eat, and most of those healthy ways to eat say the same things. Okay? Eat more plants, eat less dairy, eat less meat. Okay? Except for the exception of, they do want you eating enough dairy to get the calcium, blah, 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 but you can get calcium from other sources. And I would recommend people go back and read each of those links. But what about the cuisine of the 13 colonies? Okay? Is there anything unique about the cuisine of the United States of America? In the period leading up to 1776 and other events, blah, 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 region, diet before the American Revolution. When colonists arrived in America, they planted familiar crops from the Old World with varying degrees of success and raised domestic animals for meat, leather, and wool, and they had done in Britain. The colonists faced difficulties owing to their climate and other environmental factors, but trade with Britain, continental Europe, and the West Indies allowed them to create cuisines similar to the various regional British cuisines. Local plants and animals offered tantalizing alternatives to the Old World diet, but the colonists held on to old traditions and tended to use these items in the same fashion as they did their Old World equivalents, or even ignore them if more favorable or if more familiar foods were available. The American colonial diet varied depending on region and local cuisine patterns established by the mid-18th century. A preference for British cooking methods and apparent in cookbooks brought to the New World. There was a general disdain for French cookery, even among the French Huguenots in South Carolina and French Canadians. One cookbook common in the colonies, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, by Hannah Glass, held the French style of cookery in disdain, stating the blind folly of this age that would rather be imposed on by a French booby than give encouragement to a good English cook. She does add French recipes to the text, but speaks out flagrantly against the dishes, thinking it an odd jumble of trash. The French and Indian War reinforced the anti-French sentiment, blah, blah, blah. A number of vegetables, so keep this in mind, a number of vegetables were grown in the northern colonies, including turnips, onions, cabbage, carrots, and parsnips, along with pulses and legumes. Okay? These vegetables stored well through the colder months, so they would eat these even throughout the winter. So keep that in mind. Turnips, onions, cabbage, carrots, parsnips, and pulses and legumes. Agricultural success in the northern colonies came from following the seasons with consumption of fresh greens, only occurring during the summer months. In addition to vegetables, a large number of seasonal fruits were grown. Fruits not eaten in season were often preserved as jam, wet sweetmeats, dried or cooked into pies that could be frozen during the winter months. Some vegetables originating in the New World, including beans. This is very important to understand, okay? So this is one of the unique differences between the American diet and the British diet, okay, and the European diets in general. Our ancestors utilized New World foods, including beans, squashes, and corn. They were readily adopted and grown by the European colonists. Pumpkins and gourds grew well in the northern colonies and were often used for fodder for animals in addition to human consumption. Okay, in addition to human consumption. Game hunting was a familiar beneficial skill, so keep this in mind. Instead of consuming domestic meat, our ancestors primarily consumed game. Game hunting was a familiar beneficial skill to the colonists when they immigrated to the New World. Most northern colonists depended upon hunting, whether they hunted themselves or purchased game from others, as a method of obtaining protein for consumption. Hunting was preferred over animal husbandry. As domestic animals were expensive and more work. So this is part of what led to the American phenotype, the uniqueness of the American to the European. As I've said, white Americans are our own ethnicity. Commonly hunted game included deer, bear, buffalo, and turkey. The larger parts of the animals were roasted and served with currant and other sauces, while smaller portions went into soups, stews, sausages, pies, and pasties, which is a way of saying pastries. Venison was the most popular game. The plentiful meat was often potted or jerked, and its tripe was popular as well. Venison was especially popular during Thanksgiving. In addition to game, mutton was consumed, sheep, blah, 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 forage-based. Alcohol, hard cider. I went through this originally. Cider was preferred to beer, especially after the Revolution. In the northern colonies, a striking characteristic of the diet in New England was the seasonally availability of food. While farming in the southern colonies took place for most of the year, northern growing seasons were restricted, limiting the availability of fresh fruit and vegetables. However, the coastal colonists' proximity to the ocean gave them a bounty of fresh fish to supplement their diet year-round, especially in the north. Wheat and grain, primarily used in English bread, was almost impossible to grow in the north, and imports of wheat were expensive. Substitutes included corn. Okay, so corn was substituted for wheat in the form of cornmeal. The Johnny cake was generally considered a poor substitute for wheaten bread, but was accepted by residents in both the northern and southern colonies. Southern colonies, unlike the North, the South did not have a central cultural origin or single culinary tradition. The Southern colonies, meaning they came from more than England. The Southern colonies were also more diverse in their agricultural products. Slaves and poor Europeans in the South shared a similar diet based on many of the indigenous New World crops. The rural poor often hunted and ate squirrel, opossum, rabbit, and other woodland animals, salted or smoked pork. So keep in mind, you see a lot of game, a lot of very lean protein, okay, and a lot of vegetables, okay? It supplemented the vegetable diet. Those on the rice coast ate ample amounts of rice, while southern poor and slaves used cornmeals and breads and porridges. So the grain of choice amongst the southerners that could not get rice was corn. They would use polenta. Okay. The southern colonies can be culturally divided between the uplands and lowlands, and this distinction is seen in diet and food preparation. The diet of the uplands often included cabbage, string beans, white potatoes, while affluent whites in the uplands avoided crops imported from Africa because they were associated with and reflected the social inferiority of black slaves. Again, so you're seeing an embrace of African foods by the poorer whites. Again, adding Remember, I went over the traditional African diet and the health benefits of the traditional African diet. Okay, so those who could grow or afford wheat often had biscuits on their table. So, okay, the coastal lowlands, more varied diet, particularly surrounding Charleston and New Orleans, and which also included much of Acadian French regions of Louisiana, and the surrounding area was heavily influenced by Africans and Caribbeans, as well as the French. Rice played a large part in the diet. In addition, unlike the uplands, the lowlands, protein came mostly from coastal seafood and game meats. Now, what you'll notice, remember, they're saying that, first thing I read was saying that the high carbohydrate basis of the military diet is why everybody's so fat. We've always had a relatively high carbohydrate intake, but where were the carbohydrates coming from? Whole rice, whole corn, whole vegetables, fruits, etc. Okay, dietary changes through the boycott. The colonists, depending on Great Britain, this is when we switched to a more, American-grown maize or corn became a staple for the whiskey production. Our ancestors started eating far more, Benjamin Franklin permitted growing grapes. We started eating more domestically grown crops, even more so than we already were, okay? So, again, this leads to a more nutrient-dense diet. And I'm going to move on, and I'm going to go in later videos. This is going to be the end of this video. And I'm going to go on later videos into the specific regions of the Americas. And at the end of this, I'm going to show people how to tie this into a healthy eating plan. And that's all for this video.